I don't think he particularly enjoys being Spider-Man. No.
If you were a character with the power of a spider, what would your life be like in the real world?
Just because he has superpowers doesn't mean he has a super life. And, you know, with the good comes the bad.
At some point, wouldn't a guy who had the power of a spider say, enough, I want a life for myself?
I want a life of my own.
When I did Spider-Man No More, when I came up with that idea, I didn't do it because it was issue 50. That was just a coincidence, although I certainly picked the right issue, in an effort to be realistic in stories. See, my idea of a formula for these stories is you have to have something that's fantastic, something that's bigger than life. So as I was writing these stories, I kept thinking, boy, I think it would be great if he just decides to give up being Spider-Man.
He always had second thoughts. Why did I do this? Why did I miss the prom? Or why did I miss all those good times? Why am I never home when my aunt needs me? He always had problems. I think this time everything went wrong for him. Everything he did turned to dust. And he just said, this is crazy. And somebody mentioned, I don't know who mentioned it, what character said, grow up and stop doing the stupid things you're doing. And it rang a bell with him, and he said, this is right, maybe it was okay when I was 17, but it's not very smart when I'm 19.
We'd never seen a superhero look at his own life and say, well, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. And he took his costume and he threw it in a trash can. I mean, no one had ever done that.
I think it's natural when you have enough problems piled on to want to quit after a while. And that's always a razor's edge you have to walk, because anyone after a certain point says, I'm out of it, forget it, I'm leaving town, I'm getting a cab, I'm gone.
This is a case where Peter Parker is so distraught, and this I think is going to be shown in the film, and it's a wonderful situation where he just finally realizes he gains nothing from all of his do-gooding, and he says, what am I, crazy? What am I, disturbed? And he finally says, I'm going to give up being Spider-Man.
It's the weight of the world that keeps coming down on Peter's shoulders, and Peter's shoulders once again. And like we all come to a breaking point in our lives, Peter comes to that breaking point where he's having trouble having his two lives coexist as one. And in his mind, at least, he has to make the choice of whether he's going to be Spider-Man or Peter Parker. As much as he's mastered his skills as Spider-Man, as Peter Parker, his life is unraveling. Because Spider-Man, at least the way he's taking on the mantle, is becoming a full-time job.
Everything has to do from the point of view of ragging on Peter. Peter is put to the test, put his feet to the fire on all levels.
With great power comes great responsibility. And by definition, there are things he's had to give up. And he does that bravely and heroically. He says at the end of the first movie, this is my gift, is my curse. He's living with the gift and the positives of being this hero that he feels he has to be, and with the sacrifices that he has to make.
He's estranged from all the people close to him in his life because he's had to isolate himself because he's racked with guilt and shame. He's got two jobs. One as a freelance photographer for the Daily Bugle, exploiting himself, taking pictures of himself as Spider-Man. He's working at the pizza place that is actually Joe's Pizza. And he's going to school. And he's not doing any of them very well because he's really spending most of his time being Spider-Man and fighting crime.
His responsibilities as Spider-Man take a lot of his time, so he's doing a lot of things, none of them very well. So his focus is on being Spider-Man, but therefore he's kind of neglecting his Aunt May. He's always late for school. He's messing up a little in his job, and he doesn't have any money.
You're late. I'm not paying for those.
But Peter messed up every relationship. I mean, his relationship with Harry was ridiculous. I mean, and eventually what happened to Harry in terms of completely self-destructing on drugs and then eventually becoming the new Green Goblin, it just was one catastrophe after another. But that's the nature of his life.
I never really thought that I was giving Peter too many problems. My problem was I couldn't think of enough problems for him. Because the more problems a hero has, more problems any main character in a story has, I think, the more interesting the story is.
As we talked before, you have Aunt May, who lost her husband. Who is the guilty party, really? Peter Parker, Spider-Man.
I think he's in a lot of pain because he's been deceiving basically since Uncle Ben died by not telling her the truth of his death, and tries to push all of that stuff away because he feels like he's got to deal with being Spider-Man.
There's a very touching little scene when between Peter and his aunt, and she sort of breaks down because she has nobody else really to turn to.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that I miss your Uncle Ben so much.
It just all came very naturally to play like that, because it was a very tender moment.
She's really Peter's moral guide or moral compass or something, as Uncle Ben was. But Uncle Ben's gone now, and at the same time she struggles just with day-to-day life, with like paying bills, and Peter's always feeling responsible to take care of her. I mean, he's just always torn in so many directions, you know. He's got to like help the crime rate and save the world occasionally, and at the same time help Aunt May get her bills paid.
One of the big issues for us in the script was dealing with the guilt of Peter Parker, Spider-Man, because Harry believes that Peter knows how to find Spider-Man, and being his best friend, and how can you still take pictures of this man?
There's an undercurrent of like bitterness and sadness to Harry. Then you see some of his like lower moments where, you know, he's even having a drink or two, and he's just bitter. And with him and Peter, they're a little bit estranged. You know, they haven't really talked much. Peter, of course, is feeling a tremendous amount of guilt and shame. You know, he can't be honest with his friend.
I want us to be friends, Harry. I want us to trust each other.
And be honest with me. If you knew who he was, would you tell me?
Because he made a vow to Norman Osborn, so he didn't want to tell Harry what his father was, and he's kind of protecting the image of Norman Osborn, so he can't tell Harry what happened.
When it comes to Mary Jane, it's even stronger, because this is the love of his life. He ends up, movie one, walking away, accepting the responsibility of being Spider-Man, but not really knowing what does it mean. He wants to go and show Mary Jane, being honest with her and say, hey, it's me. He says to her, punch me, I bleed, you know, I'm human, right? And he screws up her head.
I thought I could be there for you, Mary Jane, but I can't. My mind was playing tricks too.
Do you love me or not?
That scene takes place just when Peter Parker has realized that as much as he has given away his outfit, has chased after Mary Jane Watson and promised her that he'd be there, that really he never had a right to make that promise. And that the powers weren't his to give away, and that they're really a gift for everyone.
How do you really torture Peter? And you give her John Jameson, astronaut, great kid. He's like Top Gun. Jameson's son, family owns newspapers. I mean, come on, this girl from Queens. Not only that he's adorable, he's accomplished, he's an astronaut. Inside, she'll always have something for Peter. But now we are challenging her to move on. You wouldn't find a better guy. Peter is like a voyeur, is looking at this and realizing that I'm about to lose it.
His heart is aching for her, and he's happy for her own success, you know, personally, but he's tortured by it because she's on the billboards, and, you know, seeing her, and it's difficult because it's just a constant reminder. He really wants her to get out of his mind because she's not out of his heart. You know, he's just aching for her.
She's very upfront with Peter, very much wiser, and I mean, she's grown up and she's being much more direct with Peter, and it's kind of like he's stuck in almost this little boy world still because he has no relationships with anybody. He's married to like being Spider-Man.
I know you predicted I'd disappoint you.
Bingo.
Letting his relationship with MJ slip to the side, he's losing her as a love interest, and so he makes this decision to try to win her back. And
Dr. Octavius represents to Peter someone who has achieved a certain balance in their life.
I think they have a very loving relationship, which I think is the thing that attracts him the most, actually, is Dr. Octavius's relationship with his wife, Rosie. They're a real team, and they really seem like they're in love with each other. And, you know, he's doing the work that he loves, and she's there supporting him and helping drive it herself. And I think it's wanting or longing for that sort of thing and respecting the man and his work as well.
They, in a way, have that thing that he can't have. So thematically, you know, everybody in the movie is kind of playing into these issues that are weighing on Peter.
What I think he sees in Octavius is somebody who's mastered both their gifts. In this case, it's a gift of science, where he can create something for the good of mankind, and a personal life, a loving relationship with his wife. Peter sees this and believes from that experience that it is possible to have both.
What makes Peter Peter is that despite all of this keeps on going because he has an obligation not just to himself but to Uncle Ben, to whom he made a promise. So I think that there are days he would like to hang it up, but his conscience and the quiet turning of his own conscience won't allow that to happen.
Spider-Man is a departure from most superheroes because he was young and troubled, but the personal life and the family and the secondary characters are what makes the whole thing click.
Even though it's fantasy, you know, and it's a comic book, they're characters, hopefully, with whom the audience really can relate. And, you know, they see Peter Parker, his appeal is that he's one of us. He's an everyman, he's an average kid with, you know, the kinds of problems that we all have.
All the great superheroes have fantastic alter egos. To me, that's what makes a great superhero movie, is who is the person behind the costume.
Peter finally realizes that what's wrong with him is the secret. There's nothing more destructive to the human soul than the secrets, the things we keep from others.
He is very much the everyman, faced with the problem of what do you do now? I think the first film did a very good job on portraying the origin of Spider-Man. It really focused in on the character, where movies have gone wrong in the superhero genre, so they focus on the powers and not the person who has the powers. If you have that core intact, everything else follows.